The first letter showed up on a Tuesday. And honestly, I almost tossed it straight in the trash. My name's Claire Bennett. I live at 18 Aldermoor Lane, in a house I've owned for 6 years, on a street where pretty much nothing interesting ever happens. The biggest drama we've had around here was when the Hendersons' dog got loose during a thunderstorm and somehow ended up 3 blocks away, soaked to the bone and looking like he was having the time of his life. That's the kind of neighborhood this is. Everybody knows everybody. Or at least, everybody thinks they do. The letter had my street. Just the wrong house number. Daniel Ashford. 16 Aldermoor Lane. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Mail gets screwed up sometimes. Wrong house. Wrong mailbox. No big deal. So I dropped it on the hallway table with the rest of the stuff I'd been meaning to deal with and forgot about it. For 3 days. Then another letter showed up. Then another. By the end of that first week, I had 5 letters sitting in my house, all addressed to a guy I'd never heard of. At a house I was pretty sure had been empty for as long as I'd lived on the block. Number 16 was 2 houses down from mine. Boarded up windows. A faded realtor sign out front. A lawn that had basically given up years ago. I'd walked past that house probably a couple thousand times. I'd never once seen a light on. Now, I'm not a nosy person. I don't go digging through people's mail. I don't stalk my ex-husband online. And if a package gets delivered to my house by mistake, I return it without opening it. Even if I'm dying to know what's inside. But something about that name bothered me. Daniel Ashford. I couldn't explain why. It just felt wrong. You know that weird feeling when you hear a word so many times that suddenly it doesn't even sound real anymore? That's what the name felt like. So I figured I'd just walk the letters over myself. Save the mail carrier the trouble. Maybe knock on the door, hand them over, and call it a day. I wasn't expecting anybody to answer. And I definitely wasn't expecting what I found. The front gate was hanging off one hinge, frozen in the same crooked position it had probably been stuck in for years. I walked up the cracked sidewalk, weeds pushing through the concrete like they'd had all the time in the world. Up close, the house looked even worse. This wasn't abandoned like a place that had been empty for a year or 2. This place looked like nobody had given a damn about it in decades. The kind of abandon that gets into the wood. Into the walls. Into everything. Still, I knocked. I don't know why. Maybe it was habit. Maybe some part of me just wanted someone to answer and say, "Yeah, wrong address. Sorry about that." Then I could go home and forget the whole thing. Nothing. Not a sound. So I tried the mail slot. I figured I'd shove the letters through and be done with it. Except the slot was already stuffed. And not with junk mail. Not flyers. Not coupons. Letters. Dozens of them. Every single one addressed to the same guy. Daniel Ashford. Some looked brand new. Fresh paper. Sharp corners. Recent postmarks. Others were yellowed and curled at the edges. Some had dates on them that made me stop and do the math twice. They'd been sitting there for years. I stood on that porch staring at them like an idiot. Long enough for a woman walking her dog across the street to slow down and give me that look. You know the one. That "Hey, are you okay?" look. I wasn't sure what I would have told her. That the house had apparently been getting mail for a man nobody remembered? That I'd lived 2 doors down for 6 years and somehow never questioned why the place was empty? Or that the name Daniel Ashford was starting to feel less like some random stranger. And more like something I'd forgotten I already knew. I pushed my 5 letters through the slot. Then I went home. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept telling myself it was nothing. A messed up postal record. An address nobody had bothered to update. Some guy who'd moved away years ago and left his mail behind. Simple. No big deal. But I couldn't stop thinking about the handwriting on those letters. Some weren't from companies. They were personal. No name on the return address. Just a street I didn't recognize, in a town I'd never heard of. And the handwriting. There was something about it. Something that made the back of my neck prickle. I told myself I'd forget about it by morning. Yeah. That didn't happen. 3 days later, a sixth letter arrived. Only this time. It wasn't for Daniel Ashford. It was for me. And the weirdest part? The handwriting was exactly the same as the letters I'd seen inside that abandoned house. I hadn't given anyone my name. I hadn't told anyone about those letters. And nobody had any reason to send anything to my house. But when I opened that envelope, I found out the man at number 16 knew something about my family that I didn't even know myself. I want you to picture exactly what this letter looked like. Because I've replayed that moment in my head more times than I can count, trying to figure out where everything should have started making sense. It never did. The letter came with my regular mail. Same carrier. Same time of day. Same pile of bills and catalogs I usually barely looked at before tossing them into recycling. Except this envelope was sitting right on top. And the handwriting stopped me cold. Before I even picked it up. It said, Claire. Just my first name. No last name. No return address. Nothing on the back except the flap. And my home address was written across the front in the exact same handwriting I'd seen through the mail slot at number 16. I stood in my kitchen holding that envelope for a long time. Then I opened it. There was one sheet of paper inside. And I'm going to tell you exactly what it said. Because if you're going to hear this story, you deserve to hear it the way I did. No sugarcoating. No cleaned up version. It said, You found the house. I knew you would eventually. You always do. I stopped reading. Then picked the letter back up. Because, honestly, not knowing was somehow worse. I don't know how to explain this without sounding completely insane, so I'm not going to try. I'm just going to tell you what I know. You can decide what to do with it. My name is Daniel Ashford. I lived at 16, Aldermoor Lane for 4 years, starting in the spring you turned 6. I don't think you remember me. I don't think you're supposed to. But I remember you. I put the letter down. For a second, I couldn't breathe right. Then I picked it back up. I knew your mother before your father did. I was supposed to be the man standing at the end of that aisle, Claire. Things didn't work out the way either of us thought they would, and I left before you were born. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself a lot of things. That hit me harder than I expected. My mother had been engaged once before she met my father. I'd known that. Barely. She'd mentioned it maybe twice during my entire childhood. Both times, she'd shut the conversation down so fast you'd think I'd asked her about something she wanted buried forever. She never told me his name. The letter continued. I came back to this street 11 years ago. I don't completely understand why. I think some part of a person always circles back toward the life they almost had, even when that life belongs to someone else. Then came the part that made my stomach drop. I watched your house from mine for longer than I'll ever admit in writing. I saw you grow up in pieces. Bike rides. School clothes. A prom dress I remember thinking was the wrong color for you. I saw the day you moved back into your house as an adult. 2 doors away from mine. I wasn't sure if that was coincidence or something else. Then, I never knocked on your door. I told myself not knocking was its own kind of kindness. I had to stop. Then I reached the line that changed everything. I don't know how much time I have left to write this. That's not a metaphor. I mean that literally. Something is wrong with the space I'm in, Claire, and I don't think I can explain it to you in a way you'll believe yet. I'll try to say more soon. If I can. D. I read it 4 times. Then I sat down on my kitchen floor because my legs suddenly felt useless. I stayed there until it got dark outside. I didn't even turn on the lights. Here's what I knew before that letter. My mother had once been engaged to somebody before my father. She'd never told me who. She died 4 years earlier. And now there was no way I could ask her. I wish I could tell you I threw the letter away. I wish I could say I called the police and reported some creepy stranger who somehow knew private details about my family. I didn't. Instead, I read that letter again. Then again. And then I went back to number 16. It was dark. I brought a flashlight. I tried the front door. Locked. I checked the windows. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. Every window had been boarded up from the inside. Not outside. Inside. I stood there staring at the boards. No lights. No movement. Nothing. Not one reason for a sane person to stay on that porch. I stayed anyway. Because 2 doors down, inside a house that supposedly hadn't been occupied for more than a decade, someone had just told me things about my mother that I had never told another living soul. And I needed to know how the hell he knew. The next morning, I went looking for answers. And what I found in the town records made the whole thing even crazier. Because if Daniel Ashford really existed, there should have been a record of him. A house purchase. A driver's license. A death certificate. Something. Instead, I found something that made absolutely no sense. Daniel Ashford had bought that house the same year I turned 6. And according to the records, he had never left. But that wasn't even the strangest thing I found. Buried in an old newspaper archive was my mother's name. And right beside it, Daniel Ashford's. The next morning, I started asking questions. And I learned something pretty damn fast. Aldermoor Lane didn't remember nearly as much as it should have. I started with Mrs. Okafor at number 22. She'd lived on the street longer than pretty much anyone. When I said the name Daniel Ashford, she frowned. Not like she didn't know it. More like she was trying to pull something out of the back of her memory. There was somebody in that house, she finally said. Quiet guy. Kept to himself. She thought for a second. I want to say 8 or 9 years ago. Maybe longer. Honestly, I couldn't tell you his name if you paid me. I asked the Hendersons next. They didn't remember him at all. To them, number 16 had always been the empty house. The creepy one. The one kids dared each other to walk up to. The one everybody ignored. By lunchtime, I was at the town records office. At that point, I couldn't think about much else. The property records were weird. Really weird. The house had been purchased in the spring of the year I turned 6. Buyer. Daniel R. Ashford. And after that? Nothing. No sale. No transfer. No foreclosure. Property taxes were still marked as paid every single year. On time. For more than a decade. The money came from an account the clerk couldn't tell me much about. The bank connected to it didn't even seem to exist anymore. There was no death certificate. No forwarding address. No record that Daniel had ever moved. Nothing saying he'd left. It was like he'd simply stopped. Not dead. Not gone. Just paused. I remember sitting there staring at the records thinking, what the hell does that even mean? That afternoon, I found something else. An old newspaper archive. I almost gave up looking. Then I found it. A wedding announcement. My mother's name. My father's name. The year before I was born. And underneath it, almost hidden because of old water damage, was one tiny line. My mother had previously been engaged to Daniel Ashford of Aldermoor Lane. The engagement had been called off that same year. I sat there for a long time. The letter hadn't lied. At least not about that. That evening, I went back to number 16. This time, I brought a crowbar. I'd never actually used one before. I'd bought it 2 years earlier for a shelf I never got around to putting up. It was still wrapped in plastic. I took it to the back of the house. There was one window that faced away from the street. I figured nobody would see me. I pried the boards loose. I was pretty sure I was crossing the line into breaking and entering. But at that point, I was past caring. The glass behind the boards was completely intact. And weirdly clean. No dust. That was the first thing that really bothered me. I looked through the window. It appeared to be a kitchen. And there was a table. Set for two. 2 plates. 2 chairs. 1 chair pulled back like someone had just gotten up. And a candle. Burned almost all the way down. The wax had hardened on the table. I stared at it. Then I noticed something else. There was no dust. None. Not on the table. Not on the chairs. Not anywhere. No cobwebs. No grime. Nothing. And this house was supposedly empty. For more than 10 years. I pressed my hand against the glass. I don't even know why. And then, something moved inside the kitchen. Just barely. So faint that for days afterward, I kept telling myself I'd imagined it. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. I backed away from the window. I should have gone home. I should have called the police. Honestly, I should have done anything except what I did next. I stayed there. Because whatever had moved inside that kitchen, it hadn't just moved. It had been sitting at that table. A table set for 2. And there was one detail I hadn't noticed at first. One of the plates was still warm. I know how crazy that sounds. I know what you're probably thinking. But I swear to you, I wasn't alone outside that house. And 4 days later, I found another letter waiting on my porch. This time, Daniel wasn't asking me to investigate. He was asking me to come inside. I didn't sleep that night. Again. I sat by my living room window with the crowbar still beside me, staring at the dark shape of number 16. Waiting for a light. Any light. Nothing. 4 days later, the 7th letter showed up. Only this time, it wasn't in my mailbox. It was sitting on my front porch. Half hidden under the doormat. There was no envelope. Just a folded sheet of paper. The paper was slightly damp, like it had been sitting outside all night. I opened it. It said, "Claire, I don't have much time, so I need you to let me say this. I still don't understand what's happened to me. I've spent years trying to figure it out, and I still can't give you a straight answer. What I can tell you is what it feels like from where I am. Then, it feels like the day I left is still happening. Like I never actually finished leaving. I remember packing a bag. I remember standing in that kitchen, trying to decide whether I should knock on your mother's door one last time. I remember choosing not to. I don't remember what happened after that. Not clearly. Just this. The house. The letters. Watching your street through a window that doesn't seem to let me completely outside anymore. Then the sentence that made my hands go cold. I think I've been trapped inside that one unfinished moment for a very long time, Claire. Longer than should be possible. I don't know if it's grief. Or guilt. Or something stranger than either of those words. I only know that every year, I can write a little more before it starts slipping away again. This is the 7th time I've managed to get a letter all the way to your door instead of it ending up at the empty house. I think that means something. I just don't know what. Then came the request. I need you to do something. And before you decide I'm completely out of my mind, please actually think about it. Come to the house. Not the window. The door. I think if someone on the other side actually opens it, Instead of me trying to open it from in here, something might finally move forward. Instead of staying exactly where it's been standing for 11 years. I could be wrong. I've been wrong about almost everything since the day I decided not to knock. But I'd like to finish leaving. Or finish staying. Honestly, I'm not sure which one I want anymore. I just know I can't keep doing neither. Please, Claire. D. I sat on my porch steps holding that letter until sunrise. I thought about my mother. 29 years of my life and she'd never said his name. I thought about that newspaper article. The water damage. The missing part that might have explained everything. I thought about the kitchen. The table. 2 plates. The candle. No dust. Nothing made sense. And then I thought about something else. I'd lived 2 doors away from that house for 6 years. 6 years. And I'd never once felt curious about it. Not even a little. Until that first letter showed up with the wrong house number. I don't know if that was coincidence. Honestly? I'm not even sure I believe in coincidence anymore. That afternoon, I walked back to number 16. It was the 3rd time I'd gone there. But this time I didn't bring the crowbar. I brought my keys. I don't know why. I didn't have a key to that house. Never had. But somehow, I needed my hands to be holding something that opened doors. Not something that broke them. I stood on the porch. Raised my hand. And right before I knocked, I heard something. From inside. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Coming toward the door. From a house with no electricity. No water. No utility bills. No signs that anyone had lived there for years. The footsteps got closer. And closer. Then they stopped. Right behind the door. I froze. I could hear my own heartbeat. I raised my hand again. And then, someone on the other side reached for the doorknob. That's when I realized I had no idea who. Or what. Was about to open that door. I wish I could tell you the door opened. I wish I could tell you exactly what I saw on the other side. But I can't. Because right when those footsteps reached the other side of the door, Mrs. Okafor suddenly called my name from across the street. She asked if I'd lost a set of keys she'd found on the sidewalk that morning. I turned around. Just for a second. And when I looked back, the footsteps were gone. The door was still shut. I knocked. I said his name out loud. Daniel? Nothing. I stood there until the sun went down. Until the cold made my hands ache. Still nothing. I went back the next morning. The window I'd pried open was boarded up again. Not loosely. Not the way I'd left it. These boards were bolted into place from the inside. The hardware looked older than I was. I haven't been able to get inside since. But I still get letters. Not as often anymore. Maybe one every few months. They always show up the same way. Folded. No envelope. Tucked somewhere I'm guaranteed to find them, but nobody else would think to look. And always in that same handwriting. Although lately, the handwriting has started looking different. Thinner. Fainter. Like whatever it takes to write those words is slowly running out. The last letter said, I heard you outside the door. I think that's the closest I've gotten in 11 years. Then, I don't think it's going to open for me. I think it's only ever going to open for you. And only if you're the one standing there when it finally does. I'm not going anywhere. I don't think I know how anymore. Take your time, Claire. I seem to have more of it than I know what to do with. That's it. I've thought about calling someone. A historian. A journalist. Somebody who investigates old houses and strange stories. Maybe there's a perfectly normal explanation. Maybe somebody could tell me there's a name for whatever this is. I haven't called anyone. Part of me isn't ready. Because I don't want some stranger walking onto that porch, looking at me like I'm crazy, and giving me a neat little explanation that somehow makes the whole thing feel smaller. It doesn't feel small. Not when you're standing outside that house. Not when you're looking at those windows. I still walk past number 16 every day. And now I always look up. Most days? Nothing. But sometimes, around the time the sun starts going down, I swear I see a shape behind the glass. Not moving. Not coming toward the door. Just standing there. Waiting. The way you wait for something you've already convinced yourself isn't coming. But you keep watching anyway. Because some part of you refuses to be the one who looks away first. I don't know if I'll ever knock again. And honestly, I don't know what's scarier. The thought that the door might stay shut forever. Or the thought that one day, it might actually open. So if you've ever gotten mail for somebody who doesn't live at the address. If you've ever walked past an empty house and had that weird feeling that it wasn't really empty. If you've ever felt like a place was holding its breath long after everybody else had stopped waiting. I'd like to hear about it. Because I don't think 16 Aldermoor Lane is the only house on the only street where something is still standing behind a window. Waiting for somebody to finally knock. And if you were me. If you heard those footsteps coming toward the door. And then they suddenly stopped. Would you go back? Would you knock again? Or would you let whatever's inside keep waiting? Because apparently, it's already been waiting 11 years. Let me know in the comments. But there's one thing I still haven't told you. I never found out who sent the first letter. The one addressed to Daniel. The one that started all of this. Last week, I pulled the original letter back out of the box where I'd kept it. And I noticed something I somehow missed the first time. There was no postmark. No stamp. No tracking number. Nothing. Which means the first letter was never mailed. And somehow, it still ended up in my mailbox. I haven't opened the front door since. Not after dark, anyway. Because last night, I heard 3 knocks. Not from number 16. From my own front door. And when I looked through the window, there was nobody there. Just one envelope sitting on my porch. Addressed to Daniel Ashford. And underneath his name, someone had written, "Wrong house." For more mysterious stories like this, subscribe to Discovery Chronicle. And remember, some stories are better left unexplained.